Right, so this topic is about governments making change and innovation and impact. We had a brief discussion, we know each other for a while now. But I mean, the question I think I would start with, is there actually a role that government should play in trying to enforce innovation or acceleration? Maybe that's a question for you to start with, Kat.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the expectations for government are pretty clear. One is to stay out of the way, which, as I like to say, is a craft. Like staying out of the way, like properly staying out of the way is very difficult to do and requires like serious work and serious understanding of the space. And two, leveraging like massive tools that only government has, like immigration policy or fiscal policy or funding or things that the market will not find on its own.
So stay out of the way, that's the first, I would say, challenging statement. Maybe to give a little bit of context, maybe you could like briefly introduce yourself in, let's say, 30 seconds.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Kat, and I direct this thing called La French Tech, or the French Tech Mission. And we are a hybrid team at the intersection of startups and government. And our job is really to make France one of the best places possible to start and scale global tech champions that also have a positive impact on the country. To do so, we have programs, we have funding, we have policy, and we have a lot of research at our disposal. We also have, I think what makes us particularly strong is a community of, actually a network of 100, a little under 100 communities all over the world that work with policymakers to make this happen.
Those communities, you mean the embassies, or how does it work?
No, so actually we have, Raf, who is over here, is from French Tech London. So we have this strategy, which is the official strategy of the French Tech. It's everything from hypergrowth and talent, investment, and things like that, with very clear KPIs. And we did a call worldwide and said, hey, do you want to be a part of this? Do you want to be part of the French Tech community and help us make this happen? Here's some of the things that we're doing in government, but we can't do everything. What do you guys want to do? And so we did the call, and we got an overwhelming response from French Tech communities from all over the world. We have roughly almost 50 that are based in France and 48 in cities outside of France.
Okay, thanks so much, Kat. So Voitto, next up, maybe you can introduce yourself to the audience, let's say in 30 seconds as well.
Hey, I'm Voitto, I run Moderator. I'm the only guy in the whole startup ecosystem that runs a hospital for startups.
Right.
So essentially we took over 70,000 square meters of hospital space that was government owned and filled that with the Finnish ecosystem, which in essence is a low input, high output ecosystem. So we could basically manage to put the ecosystem into one lot.
And then so, I've been there quite some time actually, during the day and also during the night at the parties. But so this hospital, how was it built and how was it created essentially?
Originally, Maria Hospital was built by Russians before Finland was independent.
Okay, right.
So the history of the buildings goes way back. We started with a simple strategy, like if you come from a small ecosystem, essentially you only need one or two things that are good for building infrastructure for startups, whether that is accelerators, incubators, events, so forth. So we kind of decided to do one hub to rule all the hubs.
One hub to rule all the hubs. I mean, so if you would say that's a small ecosystem right now, I mean, I'm investing as well in Europe. The Nordics are particularly interesting, and right now Finland has become one of the hot topics for any investor, also from the US. But how did it happen? Because I would not say that's the same case like 5 or 10 years ago. So is that Maria One? Is that what are the initiatives that kickstart this wave of innovation and entrepreneurship there?
I won't go to the sort of successful companies breeding successful companies. There was actually a lot that government did. So essentially 2007 we took the Israeli playbook of founding a VC industry in a country that didn't have venture capital base. So we kicked off 20 or so small VC firms to do pre-seed and seed. And now the government has moved on to being the LP for larger funds, trying to put in a local funds that could later put in later stage rounds from sort of B plus forward. So we actually established the VC industry from government side.
So Kat, you mentioned already, maybe government should not do that much at all, but you mentioned something really specific, immigration and visa. So what's the big deal there? Why should they focus on that particular topic?
Well, I mean, I think we all know that right now talent is the hottest topic when it comes to startups and what they need, especially those that are in a phase of growth. And not every country is going to have all of the talent that they need, sort of homegrown, right? And so with French Tech, one of our first priorities, when I say we as a country, but also me as an immigrant who is in this government position, was to...
You're not French originally, yourself,
No,
right?
I moved to France quite late. I moved to France in 2003, actually. So one of our biggest priorities was to reform immigration policy, to transform it into an actual tool that startups can use, as opposed to this just like annoying thing that they have to deal with. So we created the French Tech visa for employees, which is, I would say the most powerful employee visa that exists today. It's not the most powerful just because it's fast, which is true, it's fast tracked, but there are quite a lot of visas that are fast tracked. It's powerful because in most other countries, you have to, one, prove that you couldn't have found that employee in your own country, like you don't find anyone that profile. Two, you have to have like a minimum diploma requirement. Three, sometimes you have people that actually look at the dossier and make sure that the person who applied actually matches the job. In France, you don't have any of that. So that's all been taken out. So if you are a startup, that means that today in France, you can hire whoever you want from wherever you want, fast-tracked.
What's the catch here?
There really isn't one. There is only one criteria, which is that the person needs to be paid at least 36,000 euros annually to avoid.
Which is the minimum salary in France, right?
Well, a little higher than that, but it's to avoid the visa being used for social dumping.
Right, social dumping. No, okay, of course, that makes a lot of sense actually. So this thing, I mean, can you mention anything about the results from that perspective as well? So how many people apply, and actually how do you assess if someone is actually a proper startup? I think that's a pretty tough question to answer.
Yeah, I think that's a really tough question from an administrative perspective because, we say, when people want to do pro-startup policy, first they have to be like, okay, then what's a startup? To be honest, like I had some very operational constraints because if you do anything that requires any form of qualitative analysis as to whether some company's a startup or not, the operational impact of that is you need like a lot of people actually going through the applications. So what we did is we just made it like very black or white. So one, do you have any are you venture backed? Were you ever at an accelerator, an incubator at some point? Do you have any funding from BPI, which is the French public bank? Have you received any tax cuts? Tax credits because you're innovative. If you check any one of these, then it's fine.
And then Voitto, so I mean, you briefly mentioned the story of Maria 01, but it's actually, I think, one of the most successful stories about how to create inclusive, collaborative community from I would say, abandoned hospital. And what triggers me most is it doesn't feel like it's owned by anyone. So could you please explain how you managed to build this inclusive feeling with that hub?
I know there's a guy from Slush here. We actually started by building a foundation, a private non-profit foundation with the 57 investors, angels, entrepreneurs in the local ecosystem. And that foundation then is now used to host all these initiatives. So they're not owned by anybody. We actually switched the CEOs. I used to be CEO of that foundation. We switched the board of directors, so nobody gets the face that's sticking there for 10 years, for any of them.
Right, I think that's a pretty powerful movement, of course. So maybe, Cap, from your side, you mentioned LA French Tech. I think in a short time, maybe in 4 to 5 years, you've become one of the exemplary countries right now in Europe because of the initiatives that you created and kickstarted. Would you say this is all thanks to, let's say, Macron, or?
Yeah, I mean, to a large extent, it's pretty ambitious policy, right? Like, I mean, I don't know if anybody has tried in their own government to take out every single criteria for an employee visa.
Right.
Right. So from a I'll give you the visa as an example. So from a product perspective, what is a visa? A visa is an executive decree that needs to be signed by multiple ministers for the immigration law to be adapted to that. It's a ministerial order, which is an extension of that. It's a very complex and expensive KYC process. And then it is customer care with all of the embassies and consulates all over the world. If you don't have a strong CEO that's telling all of their departments that this is important and this needs to happen by March 1st, then it just won't happen. So there's a lot of his leadership that influences what we can and cannot do.
And so let's say, so you have Macron. The Netherlands for now, for example, we have a prince who's became, a startup ambassador. He's pretty active, and I think he's one of the, great examples of how to lead or change your perception and change. You have Macron. Let's say you're in a country that doesn't have a strong leader. How do you actually create this type of organization?
Honestly, I just don't think it's comparable because I have a budget of 650 million.
650 million.
Yeah, for example, for starters, because startups, it's really important, right? Like you can't just be like, we're going to set up a few incubators or accelerators and maybe hold a few meetups and bring together mentorship. There's some really massive issues that need to be addressed The 650 million comes from the fact that one of the massive issues we have is that we have a really strong research ecosystem, and not a lot of startups are coming from out of that. So there's a 400 million fund that we dedicated entirely to. It's a matching fund that's dedicated entirely to mimicking angel funding at early stage deep tech.
Right.
Or there's some other massive issues, and and again, when you're government, it's not just about making sure that your company, like your country, turns out like the biggest and the brightest and the fastest growing, but also you also care about what impact this is going to have on your society, right? So then we also had to put in place programs that make sure that we were discussing this earlier, that all of the regions, for example, are included, and we're not just like, basically boosting Paris.
Of course. I'd like to tap in that. I think you want to comment, Voitto.
Yeah, I think what I've seen work when you don't have that kind of like political buy-in and the right people in the right places to get something going, the government will follow if you do something great from an NGO or private base. Like they will come in when they see that it's actually benefiting them.
Right. One interesting thing, or actually two things that you mentioned, Kat, and also Voitto, you're kind of like enforcing this statement, is like one thing that Friends did is like filling the funding gap in the early stage by creating a 400 million matching fund. And the other thing is more or less, but how do you actually assess those type of gaps in the market, and how do you make sure you're not market disturbing, right? Because that's one of the downsides of having government funding.
Yeah, I think you feel it a little bit when it's happening, but you know what? There's some that are just so obvious, like early stage deep tech. It's so painful.
So specifically deep tech.
It's specifically deep tech. So it's specifically funding startups that are coming out of research and in universities and things like that. And that's like a very, like, there's some where you're like, I'm not so sure. Like we have a 200 million fund also for accelerators.
Right.
And it was created back when accelerators were the thing, and they were what was driving the startup ecosystem. And true that, like, fast forward 3 years later, we're wondering, do we need to put in more money into this fund? But there's some that are super obvious, right? One that is super obvious is early stage deep tech. Another one that's super obvious are for founders that come from underprivileged communities, that come from like the outskirts of France, or that come from refugee populations and things like that, who are talented, who are really bright, who should get a chance at entrepreneurship.
That's a good. I want to tap into diversity and I would say inclusivity in a second. But maybe Voitto, from your perspective, comparing France to, let's say, Finland from a funding perspective, it's much smaller, of course. From an impact perspective, on a perception, it's pretty large. But how you mentioned a little bit, there's a sovereign wealth fund there being pretty active as well.
Or starting just now, which is we actually. The government sold off all of their investments to create this 300 million fund to do later stage, further on deep tech investments. Or that's what they're saying, and the uproar was huge. Because our traditional way of doing it through public grant system is that pretty much every startup gets something. Like if you have a heartbeat and you're walking fast, like you'll get something off the government.
So I think we should all move to Finland then.
Not sure, yeah, but yes, basically anybody can get it, and it works similar to, it only follows the private money in a way that depending on what round you're raising, the government will match you up there. And I think that's great, because if you start picking industries, you might get the timing wrong for doing things. Let's say you're putting now 50 million to AI.
Exactly. So, Kat, one of the things that you mentioned is around inclusivity and diversity. But I would say in particular about crafting this story that works not only for Paris but for the entire of France. Let's take Spain, for example, right? There's a couple of powerful hubs right now. Madrid, there's Barcelona. Valencia is trying to be an up-and-coming hub. But can you actually copy a model that's been built already in a different city? And how do you do that with French tech? How do you make sure that the smaller regions get the same type of attention?
Well, so French Tech is a national team, right? So we have actually 13 local teams all across France in 13 different cities. And I think the fact that, one, there's a lot of coordination that's happening at a national level. These are not 13 separate teams, right? This is like one team. We meet together, we share all of our data. The programs that we have at a national level are therefore deployed at every single country, all of the funding programs, and everyone can, like, not just funding, but also the policy programs. And we have some like special programs that say like help entrepreneurs from underprivileged communities, or bring actual foreign deep tech founders into the country and things like that. And the fact that we work with 13 different offices means that it's kind of spread out and those conversations are happening.
And let's say that the city of Toulouse calls you tomorrow. It's like, hey, we want to become, I would say, Paris or the next Berlin. So what's your answer to them?
I mean, so my first answer would be, you guys should talk to French Tech Toulouse. French Tech Toulouse, which has, like Sigfox and those people. We actually have, so a French Tech, we call them our capitals. So French Tech Capital has something like 4 to 12 board members that are all like the most emblematic entrepreneurs of that particular area. They're funded at roughly 300K in terms of operations. And then they're also the ones that deploy all of our programs nationally. So usually they know what's happening nationally, what the issues are, but will understand the very specific dynamics of their local ecosystem. And the second thing is also something that I feel very strongly about is, and this is something that you see in a lot of different countries, cities tend to compete against each other.
Exactly.
Right. And I'm pretty like black and white about that. I've already told, we had the onboarding actually for all of the French Tech capitals, and when I did the onboarding speech, I was like, yeah, vous êtes l'équipe de la France. You are the French national team, and you need to actually, Toulouse, if you want to compete with anyone, compete with Florida regarding their space program. Don't compete with Bordeaux that's just beside you. Don't compete with, the other regions.
But still, I would say on a more, cities are less or more informed, right? I remember that, a couple of years ago in the Netherlands, we would have the mayor of the city of Eindhoven, who no one knows, go to, let's say, China, and then present themselves, and China would like, you're a tiny country, 70 million people, how many mayors and cities do you have? So it's still kind of a thing. Maybe Voitto, from your perspective, let's say, Maria 1 is now established, right? Finland is doing great, at least from a numbers perspective, I would say. What will be the next step that, and would you say actually there's a role for government to play still there?
There is a huge role. So kind of all these things, the startup infrastructure, the regulation to allow things to go speedier, startup visas, they've all become commodities essentially, or next 5 years, everybody will have something like that going on in terms of policies and infrastructure you have. What you don't see yet is the sort of huge war on talent from the government side. We've kind of gone that you have to sort of invest in us, promotion people out there in the world outside the EU. You got the branding people, branding you as the startup hub, but you're not really spending money on headhunting and bringing people to work in the EU. So I think governments essentially will need to start investing in building those pathways.
I think we can. I think we can all agree that having an event and then showcasing the movie about how beautiful a city or country is doesn't really work these days anymore. But you're specifically both mentioning the hunt for talent. So that's something you're tackling as well with LA French Tech. So could you elaborate a little bit more on that? How does that work, and how do you actually attract the talent to come to?
Yeah, sure. So when we're talking about talent, there's actually multiple kinds. So a big priority for us right now in the country and for French Tech is startups once they reach the growth phase. So the kind of talent that you need at that phase and the kind of talent that you need at an earlier stage are totally different. So in France, very specifically, we know today that we lack product managers, we know we lack executives, we know we lack teams that are specialized in sales and go-to-market internationally, right? And so it's pretty simple. I mean, basically what we're talking about is this is a B2C play as a country.
Right.
Basically, you're like, we need to do sort of like B2C marketing to be able to identify these are target segments, where are they, what are they thinking about, why aren't they coming into France, do they know the companies that we have? When a company does try to, somewhere along the conversion funnel, does try to get them on board, what are the reasons for which it doesn't happen?
And then you would
then we fix it.
And then you would actually technically hire a headhunter to go out to these countries?
No, so we what's better than a headhunter? The actual people from the French tech community. So it's actually way more powerful to have some of our entrepreneurs that are already in the French tech communities abroad to just sort of circulate about what this is happening. And then so what naturally happens is that you have these people, we had someone from one of the VPs of a big Silicon Valley company, and we heard that, they're about to quit and they were looking for something. More often than not, they're not like, oh, I want to work for a French company. More often than not, the issue, especially regarding Europe, is like, hey, I've seen enough of the Valley. I'm sick of it. I'm ready for a new thing. What's going on? What's hot, right? Someone from the community will hear about that.
Right.
We keep tabs on roughly like 127 startups that are growing super quickly. We'll figure out what they need.
Right.
We'll talk to the ambassador. They'll host something sometimes at the city, and they'll do this whole campaign thing, which is a little bit more effective, I think, than just a headhunter.
And then so Voitto, before you became CEO of Maria One, you were also head of partnerships at Slush. I think an example of one of the most successful conferences in Europe, maybe even the world, right? I mean, 17,500 people coming to Finland every year. I think that part of the success story is also that you have this community of people, of ambassadors, traveling to all these different hubs. Could you maybe give a slight example on that, how that works?
We did have that, but originally when Slush started growing, it was very small bunch of people. Maybe there's 5 founders in Silicon Valley who have a Finnish origin or connection that could get you the people you need. To building the conference, what we utilized originally was young people. So the guys who don't have nothing to lose, don't ask for a big salary and have a lot of energy to things to prove.
Right.
So we just did like a massive bunch of them, sent them out to get the people. Essentially that's what we did. We didn't use that much money to create Slush.
Okay, so I think we're almost out of time. So I'd like to round it with one final question for both of you. So maybe, Kat, from your perspective, you've been in office, if I can call it like that, for some time now. What will be, say, your ultimate goal? Let's say you're going 3 years from now. What would you see achieved, and when would you be happy?
So yeah, I get this question a lot as to what is the KPI. If I could only track one KPI,
Right.
what would it be? One KPI that I'm actually tracking is out of the fastest growing companies in France, how many of them have English as a main language?
Ah, okay. That's
So it's an interesting KPI because it tells you a lot on how international the ecosystem is becoming, how big they're growing, how much it's changed, and things like that.
That's an awesome final point. So English native, or English is a big important point for the growth of companies. Voitto, from your perspective, Maria 1, it's set, the offices are full, it's an amazing success. What's next for you?
So we're like 18% done with the whole hospital campus. We are now using 20,000 square meters of it. We're building 50,000 square meters of more.
That's it. Okay, well, I'd like to give them a big round of applause. Kat Borlongan and Voitto Kangas. Thank you so much.